With the warmest greeting, my name is Ali Javadi and I'm a member of the leadership of the Worker Communist Party of Iran. In this video blog, I'm going to present to you the principal positions of the Worker Communist Party of Iran regarding the agreement that has been reached between the Western countries, 5+1, and the Islamic regime of Iran, and what it means for the people, what are the illusions, what are the realities. I would like to start with our position on the Islamic regime of Iran. We believe that any change, any durable change, any change that brings freedom, equality, and prosperity to the people in Iran requires and necessitates the revolutionary overthrow of the Islamic regime. Islamic regime in Iran is not a legitimate government. It's a government of Islamists, is the government against the will of the people. It's a government against the working class. It's a government against the women. It's a government against the youth and their aspiration. And in essence, is a government against freedom, equality, prosperity, happiness, and every bit of the things that the people in Iran will demand for a better life. So our principal position is that in order to have a change, a durable change, prosperous change in Iran, we have to overthrow the Islamic regime. And in fact, we have been fighting for so many decades to achieve these objectives. And we believe that after the overthrow, the government, the state that has to come to power, that basically guarantees the basic needs and the demands and the aspiration of the working people, the women, the youth in Iran, could only be a socialist republic. A socialist republic that stands for freedom, equality, and prosperity. Our position on sanction is also very clear. We believe that sanction is a weapon of mass destruction, very much like biological weapons, very much like chemical weapons, very much like the atomic weapon. Its victims are ordinary people, independent of its impact on the states, or in this case, the Islamic regime. We believe that the sanctions as a weapon of mass destruction will basically target and deteriorate and basically will have its victim as the ordinary people in Iran. We remember from the history what the sanctions did to the Iraqi people. Based on the statistics reported by the US academician, 5,000 children, elderlies, and population were being falling victim to the sanctions and what the sanction had caused to the Iraqi society. So we are against the sanctions. We see that as an inhumane policies that the Western aggressive militaristic government have imposed against what they conceive to be their enemies. At the same time, we believe that no one should have any weapons of mass destruction. Neither the US, the Russian, the Chinese, the Western countries, the Israelis, nor the Islamic regime. Weapons of mass destruction, by its own name, basically targets and aims to destroy masses of people, and it should be eradicated, it should be eliminated. So we in the Worker Communist Party of Iran belong to the movement for the eradication of weapons of mass destruction, all kinds of weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, in the rivalries that exist between the militaristic Western governments and the reactionary Islamic regime of Iran against the so-called the atomic crisis or the atomic weapon crisis that have existed, we believe that there is a clear hypocrisy by those who have and possess the weapons of mass destruction, and they want to have a monopolistic position in this regard. We believe that this is basically a fight between the reactionary clubs and the states in the world, that they want to deprive their enemies of accessing weapons of mass destruction. We stand in opposition to all kinds of weapons of mass destruction. We stand in opposition for the Islamic regime to have weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, we state very clearly that the only state in the history that has used weapons of mass destruction has been the United States in the Second World War, that basically caused several hundred thousands of the people in Japan being eliminated in a matter of seconds. So we are against the weapons of mass destruction of any kind, whether it is economic, whether it is basically militaristic, chemical, or biological. And we think the world should be free of these kinds of weapons. At the same time, we also point to the hypocrisy and the rivalries that basically exist in this case. We need to basically clarify our position with regard to what necessitated these dialogues, these negotiations, and its final conclusions. And what do we say in this regard? First of all, we think that it is a defeat for the Islamic regime. The mere fact that the Islamic regime of Iran has to abandon its 36 years policy of blind anti-Americanism and set it aside and accept the position to come on the negotiating table is a defeat for the Islamic regime lifelong policies. And that basis the basics that the people in Iran will see and read in this agreement. The mere fact that the Islamic regime had to come to the negotiation table, had to sign an agreement, is basically means that Islamic regime no longer is pursuing its reactionary anti-American policies, and this change and this shift in the policy is being viewed as by the people as a weak position that the Islamic regime is finding itself in this situation. And that's why the Islamic regime basically came to the negotiation table. Also, it is a defeat of their policies that they had pursued prior to coming to the negotiation table. The policies of trying to add fuel to the rivalries and contentions and crises that existed in the Middle East in particular, or around the world in general. That policy, which was pursued heavily during the last president of the Islamic regime, did not achieve its objective in order to advance the position of the Islamic regime and secure its reactionary security. Therefore, they had to abandon it. And it was abandoned during the last years of the Ahmadinejad when he was the president, the former president of the Islamic regime of Iran. So basically, the Islamic regime had to accept the defeat, come to the negotiating table, direct dialogue and negotiation with the United States and its allies. This defeat is being perceived by the people correctly that Islamic regime is in a weaker position. Its policies with regard into securing itself by adding fuel to the crisis in the Middle East has been defeated, has not led to the objective that they were pursuing. At the same time, coming to the negotiation table has not been easy for the Islamic regime. Islamic regime is not a basically unified government and a state in Iran. It has factions, and the factions are in constant fight and rivalry in order to define the position of the Islamic regime so that they can maintain the Islamic regime against the will of the people and prolong its life. One faction, the pro-Western faction of the Islamic regime, the Rouhani, Rafsanjani type, basically view that the only chance that the Islamic regime has is to change its position vis-a-vis the United States and the Western governments, and in order to normalize it, and so that they could have a better chance and a better probability of staying in power. Khamenei and the right-wing faction basically see that this is a one-time deal, and for them to stay in power, they have to add fuels to the anti-Americanism and the fight against the Western governments, and that's the only way that they could stay in power, and that's the only way that they could rally their bases, the Islamists, in order to stay in the power. Both are wrong. Both are finding themselves in a difficult situation. They're wrong. The Islamists, the Khamenei, the right-wing faction is wrong because their anti-American policies has been defeated, has shown that it has not led to the objective of maintaining the government. They find themselves in crisis. At the same time, the Rouhanis and the Rafsanjanis, the pro-Western faction in the Islamic regime, is also wrong because they assume that normalization of the relationship with the West is possible, and based on that they would imagine that there is a possibility of people abandoning the policies of overthrowing the Islamic regime, and they will get themselves rid of the threat of the being overthrown by the people in Iran. This is the situation that they find themselves in. At the same time, we believe that the Western governments, United States and its allies in NATO and Israel and so on, had to come to the negotiation table, obviously not Israel, the Western governments, because U.S. find itself during the administration of the Obama that their policies of the new conservatives has basically led to disaster. Their militaristic aggression policies had led to disasters. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, all those places has basically given nothing to the United States in terms of the stability and in terms of advancing its hegemony and its position in this part of the world. So they had to abandon that policies, and basically Obama represented the shift in the policy in the US administration. And as a result, a deal was possible because for both of the sides, the Islamic regime and the US and its allies in NATO, there was a necessity for change in the politics. Also, the current situation in the Middle East, the emergence of ISIL as another faction of the Islamic regime, as barbaric as the Islamic regime of Iran, and trying to supersede that with all the rivalries that exist, has caused that their previous policies had to be abandoned, new policies had to be adopted with the hope that they will come up with an alliance against ISIS. These are some of the facts on the ground. But what does it mean for the people in Iran that this agreement has been achieved? People are happy. People have basically indicated their happiness through joys and singing and dancing against the Islamic regime will in the streets of the cities of Iran. And people have the right to be happy because a threat of war has basically been removed from above their heads, because the sanctions has been removed. Sanctions which targeted the life being of these people and worsened the worst situation that the people have had for many years under the Islamic regime. So in this regard, basically people see that this reduces the tensions, the contentions, the threats of a military attack and so on, and they find themselves in a situation that at least they could have a relief from the possibility and the probability of having a war, which could be disastrous for the government, obviously for the Islamic regime, and more so for the people in Iran. We have seen this policy in action in different parts of the world, and in particular in the Middle East. So people are happy. At the same time, this happiness does not mean that people are going to abandon or have a conciliatory position toward the reactionary Islamic regime of Iran. Contrary to that, the people of Iran basically view that Islamic regime in a weak position had to accept this deal. It was a defeat of its lifelong policies. It was a shift. Khamenei had to accept it, and as a result, this puts them in a weaker position. Their rivalries with the other faction in the government is going to intensify, and the intensification of the factional fight within the government basically weakens both of them, and at the same time gives the opportunity to people to push them toward the position of being overthrown, and basically puts people in a situation that there will be asking for higher and higher demands in regard to their wages, in regard to their social status, in regard to the liberties and freedom that they deserve to have. And this is basically the message that the Iranian people, by dancing and singing in the streets of Tehran and other major cities, are giving to the world. That this agreement does not mean that we are going to have basically support the Islamic regime. Contrary to that, it means to us that we are going to intensify our fight for a better world, our fight for a better life, our fight for freedom, our fight for equality, justice, and prosperity in Iran. And this could only be achieved by overthrowing the Islamic regime, by a revolution, a working class revolution organized by the worker communism in Iran movement. And this is what we anticipate that in the future, in the aftermath of this agreement, will happen. More and more demands of the working class, of the women, of the youth against the Islamic regime, and intensification of the struggles, various types of social struggles in the society. At the same time, the Islamic regime, knowing that these things will happen, has tried to increase to intimidation policies of itself, has intensified the number of hangings and executions so that they could intimidate people and basically suppress the social movements in Iran. However, being in a position of the weakness after this agreement, being in a position that the people can read the weakness in their eyes and in their foreheads, they are not in a position of a strength to attack and intensify the attack and intimidate the people. Islamic regime finds itself in a much weaker position in the aftermath of this agreement vis-a-vis the social movements, progressive movements in Iran. What are we asking you, the civilized world? What are we asking you, the working people? What are we asking you, the freedom-loving people around the world? We are asking you to support the progressive social movements in Iran, the movement for freedom, equality, prosperity in Iran. We are asking you to intensify your opposition against the Islamic regime, at the same time supporting the left, the socialists that have the banner of freedom, equality, and prosperity. This was a message by the Worker Communist Party of Iran that I wanted to present to you regarding the position of this party in the aftermath of the agreement between the Western governments and the Islamic regime of Iran.